Hello, welcome again to another edition of the Power BI Monthly Digest. This is the month of July. My name is Devin Knight.
I'm Matt Peterson.
And we are here again this month with a lot of great new features. Some of them are pretty big features I think you'll enjoy. And so we're excited to kind of jump into it. So we're going to really be hopping through these pretty quick because we do have a lot of things to show. The first set of things that we're going to be looking at are all around data visualizations, right?
Yep, they've added a lot of new, kind of like piggybacked off some other features to make them more kind of in the face of the user, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is some changes, or really in addition to gradient capabilities. So when you're using like a bar chart or a scatter chart or a column chart, you have the ability right now to do conditional formatting where you can make things kind of have this nice gradient so you can see how things are improving or decreasing. But there has never really been a proper legend for those, right?
Yeah, you like never knew why they were changing. Like in one of our digest videos 2 months ago, we had the profit card, and then it would change based on profit margin colors.
Right.
But we knew that. That's how we made it. And I guess we could have put a text box above there, which that would not have been good.
Yeah.
I think this is a much better improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take this is a very quick one to show. Let's go ahead and take a look, hop over, and we'll show you how you can turn on this gradient capability if this is something you're doing for the first time. And then the new feature being, how do you turn on the legend for it? All right, cool. So in our quick demonstration we have here, I have a basic column chart, nothing too fancy with it. But what I'd like to do is I want to turn on some conditional formatting on this chart so I can see over time how we've progressed either via profit margin or maybe total sales, whatever it may be. And you can do that by selecting the chart, then going over to the format section of the chart. And then under the data colors section, you'll see there's a section where you can define the data colors. You can also, by the way, turn this on and you can have certain colors for each one of the data points. That's all been there in the past. Even this feature I'm about to show you has been there in the past, but this is going to get us to the new feature. So I'm going to create an expression on the default color here. And the expression is going to be based off of our measure called total sales, which is actually under this table. And we could actually make it off of profit margin or something else if we wanted to, but I'm going to base it off of total sales, which happens to also be in the chart. But it doesn't have to be in the chart to use it. All right, so I'll hit OK here. It adds this nice kind of gradient effect so we can see over time. Green is good, red is bad. But how do we know that? No one looking at this chart would know by default, other than just kind of what you know about colors, that one is good and one is bad. So what has been added is a new legend capability. So if you go up to legend, you can now turn on a legend here. And this legend now actually provides a proper scale to show you what's good, what's bad, what does the greenish color and what does the red color mean here. Now you have some proper legend for it.
Great. I like how it gives you that low end, the min side and the max side of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So big improvement there. It seems like something that is very small, but a pretty big improvement for something that gives you some clarity here.
Especially bringing in a separate measure that's not even on that visual would be really great for that.
Absolutely. All right, cool. So the next thing we're going to look at is a change in the slicer. So the common slicer you've been using for a while, we've seen a few changes with it recently where you can now have hierarchies in it. We now have a new slicer header capability that we didn't have before in the past as well. And it's dynamic. It allows you to actually see, you can store what things are being selected in the title of the slicer. So there's a lot of new things that have come with this that make it definitely an improvement over what we had in the past.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. So let's take a look again. All right. So in this example, I'm going to move over to this next page that I have. And I happen to have a slicer here already. You, of course, could have titles in the past. You're probably used to playing with titles. And titles typically, and it looks like I cleared mine out here already, but typically you would have some kind of text in the title that's based off of the fields that are being used in the particular visual. But now you have a new property here called slicer header. And if you flip this on, it gives you the ability to flip on a few different things. And it looks like I've already made some changes here, so I'm going to refer it back to default so you can see what it looked like. But by default, it would plug in the different fields that you have. So my particular slicer here is a hierarchy where I can drill in from the country group, the territory group to the territory country to the territory region. And you could use this you could modify the text hard-coded.
That does not look good at all.
No, it's pretty awful, right? You could write an expression here, which could make things a little better. Or there's this nice feature down here where it says show summary, that when you flip that on, and we can go ahead and get rid of this if we want. Now, whenever we start to drill in this, you'll notice right now we have all selected, but we could drill into a particular country. So maybe we look at France. And you'll notice as you start to drill in, it shows you, for the continent or the group of Europe, for the country of France. And then you could go even further. Looks like the region is also France here, but it's showing you kind of this nice drill through the top header area. So it's making better use of that header area than what we've had in the past. Now, in this case, I probably would want to make this a little wider so I can actually see things, but it's a great way to get some better use out of the hierarchies than maybe we've gotten in the past. So what do you think, Matt? You like it?
I like it. Yeah, it's because especially anything's better than what we had to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, good deal. So let's flip that. So the next thing I'm going to mention just briefly, because we've talked about it recently, it was either last month or the month before, there was a new time slicer that was released that is now generally available. So if you have data that has like a date time stamp to it, you can take the time and actually extract it from the date and use that to be able to be capable or possible to be used within inside of a slicer now. So that's now generally available. You can use that. And then there's a couple features that have been enhanced with Q&A. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so with the Q&A, they've got some, I think the navigation experience is better. We've talked about in the past how you can teach Q&A, certain things, you can put synonyms in there for the fields, but you had to go to different places to do it.
Yeah.
Now they kind of put it all in one location, just right on the settings of the Q&A visual. And I think it's there's some other little tricks that we're going to show you along the way too.
Awesome. Well, let's hop over. I'm going to pull up your demo for this one, and we'll flip over. All right, so guide me through this one, Matt.
All right, so if we want to add a Q&A visual, we've done that in the past. Let's put a Q&A up in the upper left-hand corner here.
All right, and if you're new to this, you'll know there's a Q&A visual here, or you can double-click here. That'll pull it up here as well. Awesome.
All right, and one of the nice things that they're doing now is I noticed that when I was putting these Q&A visuals onto the report page, it seems to take about up the same width as the visual underneath it.
Yeah, that's nice.
So that's, it's kind of nice and intuitive there. So here's what's really neat about it. Let's go click on the settings wheel, or the gear icon wheel. And if you've used Q&A a lot, so far it looks kind of the same until you see underneath getting started, field synonyms. And so if on the left-hand side in the pane there, if we click on field synonyms, this was not available to us before. So let's talk about the first thing. Look over on the right-hand side where it says include in Q&A. You now have the ability to decide if a table of data actually is included in the Q&A or not. You might be going, well, why wouldn't I want a table included in Q&A? Well, let's think about geography, right? So if we wanted our end users to only refer to countries in terms of where the manufacturing was happening, and they don't want to see anything about where the customers are located, I could simply disregard this from the actual Q&A. So now when they start typing in country, the country would only be referred to from the manufacturing table rather than just the customer table.
Nice.
So that's one cool thing that I like about it. Another thing is if let's say we expand one of these down. So we got our internet sales table here. So we're going to expand this down. And what we see now is we have all of our names of all of our fields, and we have this terms and suggested terms. Well, what's the difference? So in Q&A, a term is going to get priority over a suggested term. And what you can do is, so if we take a look at carrier tracking number. So suggested terms, this is coming from Power BI of saying, hey, we've seen this stuff in the past. Here are things that we think are good synonyms for it. We could go, tracking number, I definitely don't want that to be included. I don't want that to be any ambiguity or whatever it might be. So I can just click on the X, and tracking number is now off of the suggested terms. So if someone tries to type in tracking number, they're not going to get any kind of result.
So suggested ones aren't actually used. They're ones that are kind of generated by Power BI that are, hey, these might be things, as the name implies, they're suggested, but not actually used yet, right?
Exactly. And if we go, oh, you know what, carrier tracking number or carrier tracking NO, I really like that one. I want that to show to my end user right away. If I click the plus sign, it will now add it over under carrier tracking number, which is nice. Well, what if we have our own synonym that we want to put in here for this field? And we're like, well, I want to put in something that was not suggested. It's not already a current term. We just click on the add button and we can type in maybe in our field CTN for carrier tracking number, something that is used by our end users.
Yeah.
So now CTN is going to show up in the Q&A feature. So that is one of the neat things that we can do now. It's more intuitive, I think, to go through it. One of the other things that we can do is if we were to, so I'm going to get out of here for now. So that is the main thing that was added into the navigation experience. If we go back into our Q&A, and let's say I decided to take this visual down here, and I wanted to change the column values, which is currently sales amount, and I just wanted to call this the big money. All right, let me see if I spelled that right. Big money. And so we're going to see that big money will be, it will be updated for us. And from there, let me come back on over. And it did not, I must have got fat fingered on the keys here. Big money, there we go. So now we see big money here on the y-axis. Well, if I go back into the settings, big money is now a suggested term for sales amount. And so then I could just simply go and put that amount into the regular terms or keep it as a suggested term. So that's just something you can do quickly on the fly.
Nice.
The one other change for Q&A, up until today, you've had the red underline when you type something in. So for example, if I type in, what country has most profit margin by date? So if I type that in, what country has most profit margin by date, I get this red underline. Well, what does that mean? It means Power BI has no clue what we're trying to say. So we've got to fix that. So we go, okay, well, what about if I put by due date? Okay, blue. Blue is good. Blue means it can reference that. It can make a visual for us. Those are the two things we've had up until this point. Well, what if someone comes through here and types in by year? Now, yeah, we get this orange highlight with these dots underneath it as well. And what this is saying is, hey, we can reference year, but what year do you want? Because there's so many different years. We've got due date year in this table. We have the order date year, purchase. So when you see that, it's letting your end user say, you need to be a little bit more specific in order to get this show on the road.
Gotcha. So red or orange dots here indicates it's ambiguous in some way. Gotcha.
Ambiguous in some way. That's it. And then one other feature that they did come out with, and this might be important to you or not, if you've ever added in the button for Q&A, if you do insert button and you do the Q&A, so we get our button over here, let me click on it. This will look a little bit different. So if you're using an older version, now this looks like the actual visual itself that we had on our page.
Right.
Before this version, they had all those suggested questions on the left. It was a grayed out icon kind of thing, background. So now it just looks like the visual itself.
Gotcha. All right, cool. So some nice little changes there to Q&A. I like the synonyms feature, a lot of nice enhancements. All right. Well, we made a little switcheroo there.
Whoa, wait, what happened there? See if you're paying attention.
Yeah, exactly. So the next one I think we're going to talk about is a new visual, which is always exciting to talk about, right?
Yeah, new visuals. It's awesome.
Yeah.
We use the basic map visual. That's what I use the most part of my demonstrations and teachings. But I think I will definitely be switching over to, and it's in preview right now, but using the Azure Maps.
So there's a new map visual called Azure Maps. So this is pretty exciting. I'm assuming it's a lot more detail. It goes much more in depth.
Much more detailed, but it does have its restrictions. Okay. So when I was starting to play around with it, I was like, okay, new maps, those are always fun to play with.
Right.
You have to have the latitude and longitude.
Oh.
So if you just have your list of cities and states, too bad. So you're going to have to go and, get another table, and that's going to have the latitude and longitudes for those actual locations.
Okay. Well, let's give it a look.
So in order to get to the map, we gotta find it. So it is now over here with that Azure icon. So this is your Azure Maps. So let's put this in here. And we're using a different data set for this one. And it's going to come up with this disclaimer for you. It's going to give you some legalities about how it's accessing the information, the background running engine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the latitude to latitude, right? And longitude to longitude. And now we're going to actually see a map. And so right now, these are all the different cities that I have in this table, their latitudes and longitudes. And so if I hover over down here, like by Alabama, it gives me the exact latitude and longitude. So far, nothing crazy. Mm-hmm. But now let's do what we would have done with just a regular map. I want to see where my banks have actually failed. So I'm going to bring down bank name into the size. And now the size of these some have gotten bigger, some have stayed the same. This one definitely got bigger because there are 2 banks that have failed in this location. So far, nothing much has been changing with what we've seen. Well, I'm going to add a little bit more to it here. I'm going to take the city, and I'm going to add that to the legend. So city to the legend here. So now all of these have changed into different colors based on the cities, just what a legend would do. So again, we're thinking not much has changed. Well, let's come up to the top here, and we have lots of different kind of like layers of how do we want to see the map. So I always like the hybrid one, and you can play around with these. There's lots of them up here. This is the hybrid, so we can kind of, if we can go zoom in just using our mouse wheel, then I'm going to wait to show that in a second. So these are your bubbles. This is the default layer or the default visualization for when making an Azure map. And if you want to mess with the bubbles, you have some options. Just like with anything, we're going to go into the formatting well. The bubbles are automatically turned on by default. You can change what's the smallest size of a bubble that you want. So for our banks that have just one failed bank, what's their minimum size? I'll make it 15. Max size, I'll turn it up to 44. The other parts that I like, you can change your outline color. So I'm always, you know me, if you've been watching these videos, I always like to put that pink outline color around things. And then you have the pitch alignment, which we'll talk, let's just do that now. So our pitch alignment is technically at viewport. Now, if I take it to map, it's going to be a subtle difference once we start zooming in and we start actually changing the pitch.
Oh, wow.
So what I'm doing right now is I'm clicking on my mouse and moving, so that way I can see the different aspects of it.
So you have to actually right-click to do that on.
Yeah, and you also have over here, you can change your default pitch. You can change it up and down as well. You can do a reset if you get too crazy with what was going on. Same thing with the turning of the rotation. You can reset to the rotation so we're back in business to where we were to start with. Cool, right? Of course. Cool. All right, now let's go off of the bubble and let's turn on the bar chart. So it's going to come all the way out. I have nothing visualized, so now we see the whole world here. But now if I go to bar chart, now it's actually going to show me my visuals.
Oh, interesting.
And so it looks like we've got a duplicate over here because the world is round. So let's go on in here. And so now we see, based on the height of our bars, what we have going on. So Houston over here has 2 in it. So if we get really close in and we start messing around, we can see, and you have to play around with this. And I'll come out a little bit more. The other thing that this can do is it respects your slicers. So let me go to Florida. So when I click on Florida, right up in your face to start with, but then it's going to get us to the exact city location, which we have here being, I think this is Tallahassee, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
It is Tallahassee. All right. So we see that. We can change the map layers as well. Another thing that I think is kind of neat here, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit to show this, is we have the traffic layer to add on to this. So I'm going to take this traffic layer, going to turn it on, and it's going to give you 2 options. You can either show incidents nearby, and you can actually see the traffic control. So I'm going to do traffic control. I'm going to get rid of the show incidents, and we come on out. Now, the one thing I have noticed is it does take a while to load sometimes. So in just a few seconds, it will populate. If not, it might be because we got the internet running a little bit slow. And over here, this is where you turn the traffic on itself. And so now I see that the traffic is on. This is all up-to-the-date information. So, if you have a construction business and you were the ones tasked with telling someone to go and fix this pothole or whatever, you can kind of monitor them in real time. So a lot of other things you can do. You can superimpose other images on top of the maps. You can bring in other layers, other JSON files that have other aerial views and map views. So like with this failed banks, it might have been cool to get a reference layer of the real estate prices for certain times. So yeah, lots of things. Be careful though with the legend. For example, if I would have added the year to the legend instead of city, Houston, Texas would have shown only 1 failed bank. So be careful on what categories you're putting into the legend, and you might decide to put in measures instead.
Okay, very cool. I like that one. So we did a little switcheroo again. It's always fun to get new visuals, and that one's definitely, it kind of reminds me, and I'm not sure if you played with this tool or not, but in Excel, they had a tool called Power Map, and it was kind of a mapping tool within Excel that was sort of part of the Power Platform, sort of, with inside of Excel, and it has a lot of similarities to that, it reminds me of. So that's a big update. Having a new visual is always a big update. We have another pretty big update now, which is all around external tools. So a lot of Power BI users, after they use Power BI Desktop for some time, they start exploring some of the other third-party tools that have been developed. And they're usually really set apart from the Power BI Desktop. They're not brought into the fold because they're third-party. They're not Microsoft. But Power BI, the Power BI team has actually opened up the Power BI desktop so that you can launch these third-party tools from within inside of it now. And so there's some really popular ones that were mentioned in the announcement blog for this. Ones like the DAX Studio.
I use that all the time.
Yep, DAX Studio is a big one. Tabular Editor is another big one, which I'll show you here in a few moments. And then the ALM Toolkit, which is Application Lifecycle Management Toolkit, which is all about kind of moving things from dev to production to test and so on and so forth. So those are now integrated into the product. It's pretty easy to launch them. You install the tools. You'll see there's a new ribbon for external tools available to you. I did have some issues with DAX Studio, but there's some notes in the announcement blog for this one that actually give you some guidance on how to get around any issues like I ran into. And I followed the blog, and it worked perfectly. So there's basically another JSON file again that you put into a special place, and if you put it there, then it works. So let's take a look at the external tools, and then I want to show you what benefit that we get by having this external tool capability that's now integrated, it's allowing us to do some things in Power BI that we're not supposed to be able to do. So let's take a look. All right, so this is Matt's example on Maps. Let me flip back to our example here. So you may notice up on the top, I have a new ribbon here called External Tools that you could not do previously. Inside here, I have third-party tools, the ALM Toolkit, DAX Studio, Tabular Editor. All of these are now integrated into the product, although you still have to install them separately. And just to point out to you, if you ever have any issues getting them to show up inside of the Power BI desktop, this is the folder right here. I'll leave it up here for a few seconds. This is the folder that you need to have this special JSON file stored in. And for some reason, DAX Studio didn't show up in here by default for me. So I had to actually kind of come in here, edit one of the other ones, and point it to DAX Studio, and it was able to work after that. So just keep that in mind that if for some reason you are missing any of them, this is the folder that you need to drop this special JSON file in to make the third-party add-ins work. All right. So here's the real benefit, or here's one of the benefits. There's a lot of benefits to having these third-party tools, but one of them is I now have the ability to do things inside Power BI that I should not be able to do. For instance, using this tabular editor, I'm going to go ahead and launch this. And when I go to launch this tabular editor, it popped up on my other screen. Let me bring it over to the right place. Ooh. There we go. Using this tabular editor, when I launch it, it automatically connects to the Power BI desktop solution that we're looking at right now. So it's acting like we are looking at an analysis services tabular model, even though it's a Power BI model. And what that allows us to do is actually steal some of the features from analysis services and bring them into Power BI. So things like one of the most popular options here is called calculation groups. And if you're not too familiar with what calculation groups are, in essence, they allow you to create some dynamic calculations. So you can write DAX that can dynamically be executed whenever something is dragged onto the screen. And you might be saying, well, that's what DAX does already. But this one's a little bit more special, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So if we wanted to create something like a calculation group, I can right-click on the model and say I want to create a new calculation group. Okay. And you'll see calculation groups show up here underneath tables. So these are all the tables we already have in our model. You can see them on the right-hand side of our Power BI desktop as well. But we also now have a new thing here called a calculation group. And we're going to go ahead and name this calculation group. We'll call this something like, we'll just call it calculation tool. Okay, something like that. So this is going to appear inside the Power BI desktop just like any other table once we're done. All right, so we'll expand the calculation tool, and then you'll select the calculation item, and you can actually right-click to add new calculation items. And essentially what we're doing is we're creating new formulas that can be dynamically executed when we drag in this field. Right now the field is called name. You may want to rename this to something else. It's a pretty awful name. You can double-click on it, or you can come down here and rename it this way as well.
A name is a name.
Yeah. So I'm going to call this something like date calculations. Because what's going to happen when we drag in this, we're going to make it so that our calculation group will automatically calculate different time intelligence formulas for us based on whatever measure we bring onto the design surface. So for those of you that have come from like an analysis services background, this is something you would do with like scoping statements and MDX. If you used to run multidimensional cubes, you have the ability to do that in tabular models with calculation groups. And now having this extensibility into Power BI Desktop with Tabular Editor allows you to also have that capability inside of the Power BI Desktop. So I'm going to go back to calculation items, and we're going to add a new calculation item. And then we're going to go up to the little expression editor here, and we're going to start with a pretty simple one. We're just going to do selected measure. And what all this does is basically just says bring back whatever you happen to drag in. So if I drag in total sales, the first thing it's going to return back is just display total sales. But, and we can call this something like, let's call this current. Let's just call this current. But we can add other calculation items here. So if we add another new calculation item, we can call this one something like year to date. And then we can do a year-to-date calculation up here now. So if I do something like total YTD, selected measure, and then we tell it which is our date table. Our date table is called date, and our date column is, by the way, we could drag over from here. So if I wanted to, I could say, rather than typing this, let's drag in full date alternate key right here. And drop it right there.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, that makes life a lot easier for you. All right, so then we'll do a little close parentheses here, and we can do multiple calculation items here if we wanted to. Let's do one more just to kind of show what else we can do. I'll right-click, do one more calculation item. And this time, let's call this last year. So I'm going to call this last year, or prior period, or whatever we want to do. And then inside this one, we're going to use the formula or the function called calculate, which many of you are probably familiar with a little bit. And we're going to tell it that we want to return back selected measure again. Again, selected measure just says basically bring back whatever you dragged in. So whatever you dragged in, you're going to use here. And then we're going to use the function called same period last year. Okay. And then we need to use that date column again to pass into it. So I'm going to go grab from my date table the full day alternate key, drop that right behind that, close parentheses twice. And we should be good to go. Now, you can add some formatting on here. So, for instance, you may want to apply some formatting, like show it as a currency. I'm going to show this one with formatting, and then I'll leave the others alone just so you can see the difference. But I'm going to have this one to show as a dollar amount with a 2 decimal place there. Okay, that's kind of hard to see. Let me zoom in on that for you. I see Matt looking here himself trying to look at it, so let me zoom in. That tells me I'm doing something wrong there. So, pretty simple formatting string. There's our formula, very similar to a kind of same period last year function you would normally do. Just instead of bringing in a measure, you bring in the selected measure calculation there. All right, once you have this, you're going to save or deploy these changes. So we'll hit save. And when you do that, you might have noticed, I'm not sure if you saw my screen shift a little bit on the right-hand side, but it added in a new table. So if we look down at the top, actually, it's called Calculation Tool is our new table that got added. We're going to go ahead and refresh our model here now that we've done that. It's going to go ahead and pull in the data a second time. Actually, it looked like it did it right away. And we can see this new column in here called Date Calculation. Now, here's what we can do this. We have this table here that has the total sales already in it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in from my calculation group called Calculation Tool, I'm going to bring in the item or the column here called Date Calculations, drop it into the column section. All right, so when we do that, you can see we have a new set of columns here created for us. Here's our current column. So that's basically just bringing back whatever the selected measure was, which was in our case total sales. But then we had a item here for last year, which shows us the prior year sales. And then we even had a third one in here for year to date. Now, you can have as many of these as you want. So you can have multiple calculation items. But the huge benefit here is normally if I wanted to do this, I would have to go create a calculation for last year for total sales, for margin, profit margin, for every single measure that I have to create these formulas. But now, rather than having to create year to date for every single thing I have, I can just, and you can ignore that for a moment, I can just bring in whatever the new measure is I'm looking at, and it'll now calculate it for whatever I happen to drag in. I don't have to create that over and over.
That is crazy. That saves so much time.
Absolutely, it does. So huge benefit. That was something that you could not do in Power BI before, but now having this external tools capability that we showed up top here allows me to tap into some things that I have available in other tools that are now available here as well. So a little bit of a lengthier process there to do that, but it's really cool capability that we couldn't do before.
Yeah, I like that. So it's like creating this one gigantic variable to say, hey, bring in whatever measure you want to. And I see,
Yeah.
especially with time intelligence, where that would be life-saving.
Yeah,
I don't
no,
know about life-saving, time-saving.
time saving, absolutely time saving. Now, speaking of time saving and DAX, there is a slew of new DAX calculations that's been released this month. There's 49, almost 50 different visuals, not visuals, but DAX formulas. They're all around kind of financial things that you would do in Excel. So if you do a lot of financial processes in Excel, a lot of those Excel formulas that you use for that have now been brought over to Power BI. I'm not going to go over every one of them because there's so many of them, but
yeah, too many.
That's something to keep in mind. And then there was also some updates to if you're using Live Connection. So if you're using Live Connection, you have now the ability to look at the model view. So just a reminder of Live Connections in Power BI. This would be if you're connecting into analysis services, either multidimensional or tabular, or if you're connecting into the Power BI data set, you have the ability to do a live connection. And in the past, you didn't have the model view, that little icon on the left-hand side, but now you do. That's now available to you and is generally available. And then the one last thing I'll kind of show to wrap up is the data type detection inside of the Power Query Editor. So many of you are probably familiar whenever you go to connect to a data source and you pull it into the Power Query Editor, it tries to make its best guess on what the data types of those columns that you're bringing in should be if it can't figure it out on its own. Sometimes it makes mistakes.
Yeah, sometimes it's good.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's bad. You always got to check it, make it look, especially zip codes.
Absolutely, yep. And so there has been in the past the ability to turn that off, but you could only turn it off for the workbook, or I should say the Power BI file that you are in. They've now turned that on to be a global feature. So I'll hop over real quickly, show you how to do that. And it's easy enough to show. All you'd have to do is go under the File menu and underneath Options and Settings and Options. Previously, the only way to do this was going to be only on the one file. So you would have to come down to Current File, and underneath Data Load, you would see this option here called Detect Column Types and Headers. That's been there for quite a while now. But the new change is now you can do it on a global level, so that way next time you open up the Power BI desktop, it will remember that you don't want to detect the data types. So underneath the Data Load for a global section here, you'll notice there's a new type detection that wasn't there previously, where you can tell it how do you want to handle detecting data types as you're going through that data import process inside Power Query. So quick little thing to show there, but that's the last little thing I wanted to show you for this month. There were so many cool things. A lot of them required more in-depth demonstration. So what are your thoughts on some of these different things, Matt?
Very good, useful. Always, man, they always make you keep learning.
Yeah.
You can never just get stagnant with Power BI. There's always something new to learn. I really like the new tool that you just showed me. I'm trying to already figure out how I'm going to use that with some of my DAX introduction course.
Yeah, absolutely. It saves a lot of time when you start getting into DAX. One of the first things you're doing is probably getting into some time intelligence likely, and so now you can really scale that where you couldn't before. Before you'd have to create a calculation or a formula for every single example of how you're working and looking at dates. Now you can kind of create this template almost. You use the term variable, very much like a variable, where you can plug in different things into it and have it produce those different things for you. And let's say I didn't need every one of those time intelligence functions, I could add a slicer or a filter in there to say, hey, just show year to date for this one. Don't show everything else.
Okay, so you can filter it out. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I'm going to have to get a good table with all my latitude and longitude.
Yes.
Because I think I'm going to go straight to Azure Maps from now on.
Yeah, that's a way more impressive map than we've had in the past for sure. I like the traffic, being able to add that, and the ability to also add in your own JSON layers is pretty cool. So a lot of neat things that came out this month. What were your favorite things, though? Let us know below. Comment below. Let us know what some of your favorite features were, and we'd love to hear from you and see what you thought was most interesting. And of course, as always, if you're looking to get more in depth into Power BI, check out our Power BI training as well as our Azure training. We talked about a little Azure Maps in here. You can take a look at that at pragmaticworks.com. You can sign up for a free trial that includes actually 3 free courses now. The Free for Life, that's the Dashboard in a Day course, App in a Day, and Power Virtual Agent in a Day courses.
Oh, I didn't know we added that one.
Yeah, we added a new one. Those are free forever. You can sign in. And then we have another 58 courses that are ones that are part of our paid subscriptions that you can take a look at as well. And if you see that might be useful to you, you can, of course, subscribe. So again, my name is Devin Knight. I'm here with Matt. Yep. We appreciate you watching today and look forward to showing you some things next month. Thanks a lot.